Clearly, Brooklyn has been hesitant to do a long-term deal with Irving, but they also run the risk of alienating Kevin Durant and perhaps unfastening him from his commitment to wanting to be in Brooklyn if Kyrie Irving were to leave.
The situation regarding Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving has been a very complicated one, and no one's denying that. I mean, we've been bringing you guys updates almost every other day alongside with the latest developments in this entire controversy. And today, it seems like it just hit an absolute melting point. So before we get to the content, make sure you drop a like, subscribe, and turn on our notifications to help the channel grow. If you think I talk too much, I upload short versions of this content onto my TikTok and on my Instagram. Now that we got all that out of the way, cue the intro. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? To set the stage for those of you that happen to miss my other two videos, the primary problem that the Brooklyn Nets are currently undergoing is in regards to Kyrie Irving and his contract. So there's a huge divide between Kyrie Irving and the Brooklyn Nets. And to summarize it in just 1 minute or less, the Brooklyn Nets feel like Kyrie Irving hasn't lived up to his contract. And with all due respect to Kyrie Irving, I can understand what they're saying. After all, Kyrie Irving in 3 seasons with the Brooklyn Nets has played less games than he did in 2 seasons with the Boston Celtics. And while you could be sensitive to an individual that happened to play less games as a result of injuries, which bear in mind, Kyrie Irving did get injured, at the same time, there were other off the court issues that kept Kyrie Irving out of games. Yes, one of those off the court issues was the fact that he didn't want to get vaccinated. And to that, obviously, we're going to respect his beliefs. But even before that, there were instances of Kyrie Irving taking time off from Brooklyn Nets games, and then next thing you know, you'd see a video of him partying with his family, which I'm not saying he's not allowed to do so, but whenever you add that to the vaccine drama, to the fact that he took time off during his first season with the Brooklyn Nets, on again and off again before electing to get surgery, which was a smart move because Kevin Durant wasn't available, all of it just adds up to Kyrie Irving getting overpaid for not being able to perform as much as the Brooklyn Nets were hoping that he would. And that's not my perspective, but I imagine that's what the Brooklyn Nets perspective is. Now we're in the midst of an absolutely heated battle, and Kevin Durant keeps getting pulled in more and more and more each and every day. So we have 2 updates to give you guys. One is from Jake Fisher and one is from Adrian Wojnarowski. So here's what you have to know. There's 2 absolutely crucial days for the Brooklyn Nets. One is going to be the NBA draft, mainly because that's when you see the most player movement in the form of trades, which I'm not anticipating Kyrie Irving getting traded, but if he were to get traded, one of the more popular days for that to happen would be during the NBA draft. The second being on June 29th, which is the deadline on Kyrie Irving's $36.9 million player option for the 2022 to 2023 season. And there's a lot of ground to cover in order for Kyrie Irving to return to the Brooklyn Nets, which is obviously Kevin Durant's preference. Kyrie Irving clearly wants to get paid like a maximum contract star because, bear in mind, when he is playing basketball, he is an absolute superstar and nobody's denying that. But as a result of his inconsistency during his tenure with the Brooklyn Nets, the Nets prefer a short-term incentive-laden agreement that includes benchmarks such as games played to make up for the fact that Kyrie Irving missed significant time during his tenure with the Brooklyn Nets. Now, as a result of that, obviously, Kyrie Irving is opting to get more stability in the long term because obviously as you get older and if the injuries pile up, there are question marks about a player's ability to stay healthy and consistent for the future. Now, there is this one rumor where Kyrie Irving might be looking for a way out of the Brooklyn Nets. Now, there is interest from Kyrie Irving, the Los Angeles Lakers, and the New York Knicks, which has circulated among league personnel since the NBA draft combine in mid-May, but a few team executives have given much credence to that chatter, because if Kyrie were to opt in for the 2022 to 2023 season with the hope of being traded traded to Los Angeles, Brooklyn would have little incentive to negotiate with the Lakers, who would struggle to send adequate compensation back to the Brooklyn Nets. Now, there is a path for Irving to decline his option and sign with New York as an unrestricted free agent, and part of the rumblings about Irving and the Knicks' mutual interest is that head coach Tom Thibodeau is a fan of Kyrie Irving. But New York would have to shed significant salary, sacrifice valuable draft capital in the process, and still likely need to stretch a contract or two to free up the space to meet Irving's near $40 million in wages. So this brings us to Adrian Wojnarowski's deep dive on this entire situation, and it opens up with Kyrie Irving's search for leverage on his contract discussions with the Brooklyn Nets won't be found with the threat of a $30 million pay cut to sign with the Los Angeles Lakers, but the sum of the franchise's deepest fears is that Kyrie Irving walks and Kevin Durant demands a trade, which is a very interesting scenario because bear in mind, at least what we thought, and we're going to talk about this a little bit because there's been a report about this since, but at least what our understanding was as NBA fans up until this point was that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving were best friends, and ultimately that's the reason why they joined together in Brooklyn. Woj begins to mention how obviously the Nets want Kyrie Irving on a shorter deal, whether it's via his $36 million opt-in for the 2022 to 2023 season or an opt-out and new deal that could give him a raise to $42 million annually on a 2-year deal. Now, this is as a result of the Brooklyn Nets owner, Joseph Tsai, and Sean Marks making a stand on Kyrie Irving's unwillingness to get vaccinated, initially refusing to let him be a part-time player, only to allow him back midway through the 2021 to 2022 season. In these Irving contract talks, the Nets are trying to take back a measure of leverage on a star who hasn't been available nearly enough in his 3 seasons. So here's the thing, on Kyrie Irving's side, he feels like the Brooklyn Nets haven't supported him during a point where he was trying to take a stand for something that he believed in. The Brooklyn Nets, on the other hand, is like,
yo, we're paying you a ton of money. Please show up and play these games.
Now, ultimately, yes, Kyrie Irving would lose out on $17 million as a result of not being able to play, but this entire situation opens up a very interesting conversation, which is how far do the Brooklyn Nets push and leave themselves open to the organization's greatest vulnerability? An Irving exit resulting in Durant deciding the roster is no longer talented enough for championship contention. If Kyrie Irving leaves, the Brooklyn Nets free up about $10 million of cap space. That and the existing Brooklyn Nets roster, with all due respect, I don't think is enough to put a contender around Kevin Durant. That's not enough money to get yourself some good role players to surround Durant with to potentially make a deep run, at least in my opinion. So obviously your best bet is trying to retain Kyrie Irving. And as a matter of fact, the scary part of this is that Kevin Durant hasn't even bothered to recruit during this period, which is a very big deal. Free agency is about 8 days away from now. So this is the time where you see KD and LeBron and all the other stars from respective NBA teams making a push to recruit various players to their teams to strengthen their teams before the upcoming season. And the Brooklyn Nets, after getting swept by the Boston Celtics, definitely need some help. Yes, they didn't have Ben Simmons, and obviously they were dealing with injuries, but still, this is a point where Kevin Durant needs to be the most active in his recruiting, especially when you consider how active this man's been on social media.
He has the time to recruit right now.
This is where it gets scary because Woj even comments on this, saying in previous off seasons, rival agents and players would tell you of Kevin Durant's eagerness in talking to potential free agents. So far, that hasn't been the case with him. Outside of Irving, the Nets' most important free agent is guard Patty Mills, who still hasn't decided whether to exercise his $7.2 million player option. Around the Irving drama, the Nets environment has made it harder to keep in court role players, sources say. And this is a very real thing. I mean, role players, whenever they want to sign with teams, they want to sign with teams that have a rock solid culture where they could just go in, buy in, and potentially compete for a championship. If you don't believe me, look no further than what Kent Bazemore was tweeting when the Golden State Warriors won the championship this past year. Bazemore thought that he had a better chance of winning a championship with the Lakers than with the Golden State Warriors. And to be honest, I don't necessarily blame him. The hype around the Lakers last offseason was real. And I'm admitting this as a Laker fan, even though if I thought that the Russell Westbrook trade made no sense whatsoever. But there was significant hype. I mean, you had a bunch of role players from the Lakers championship season coming back to the team alongside with Carmelo Anthony. And although there were obvious flaws in hindsight, it was still an exciting time, and the more hyped up team last offseason was the Los Angeles Lakers, not the Golden State Warriors. And ultimately, Kent Bazemore tweeted out how he was sick at the fact that he made the decision to sign with the Lakers over the Warriors because the Warriors wanted his services, which means he he would have won a championship. Now let's talk about Kevin Durant possibly getting traded, which Woj even dives into that. Now, I personally don't think it's going to happen, but it's still something we should talk about if the worst case scenario happens. There are teams rooting for Kyrie Irving to opt out and walk away from the Nets, believing it would give them a chance to cobble together trade packages to acquire Kevin Durant. As much as Durant asking out hangs over the Nets, there's also the reality that 4 years on his contract will mean he has little, if any, voice on when or where he would be traded. This would be a small market team's dream, robbing a Goliath of an MVP level talent whose contractual circumstances will leave him little choice but to play for them. Now, across the board, this is perceived to be as one big bluff. Apparently, Kyrie Irving thinks that his leverage is the fact that if he gets traded, Kevin Durant would want to trade. And from the angle of Kevin Durant not feeling that there's a talented enough roster around him to compete, that makes sense. But from the angle of Kevin Durant saying,
hey, you just traded my best friend, now I want to trade,
that's not necessarily the case. I mean, there's this one report that came out. According to Nets beat writer Nick Friedel, he told SportsCenter that the friendship between Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant is very close, but it isn't as close as it appears to be. Now, my assumption, as before I give you the actual quote, is the fact that they were really close until becoming teammates with one another, and I'll tell you what I mean in just a second. So this is what Nick Friedel says. I can tell you that I've been talking to people in the organization the last couple of weeks. When they finally sit down and talk to Kevin Durant throughout the summer, they're trying to figure out if Kevin Durant saw what everybody else saw. The reason that whole season got sidetracked was because they couldn't count on Kyrie, and they didn't know if he was going to be out there. That makes a lot of sense. The whole theory about why James Harden wanted to be traded from the Brooklyn Nets, aside from the fact that he didn't feel like he was being used properly in Steve Nash's offense, was the fact that it didn't seem like the very top priority on Kyrie Irving's list was to do whatever it takes to win a championship with the Brooklyn Nets. Now, look, this isn't me personally attacking him for not getting vaccinated. That is his choice, but I could understand if you're on a team with a specific individual and he is one of the captains of the team and you decided to bite the bullet and get the jab, and every single member of your team ended up getting vaccinated except this one player, especially if it's a player that is one of the highest paid players on the team. Obviously, you might feel some type of way about the fact that that player doesn't want to play for the team. And that's just my basic assessment. If you look back at interviews from even before this season, during NBA Media Day 2021, James Harden seemed very annoyed every single time he was asked about Kyrie Irving's vaccine situation.
I kind of hope that in some kind of fashion, we'll see Kai play.
I'm gonna give him a shot if I got to.
Now, in regards to how close KD and Kyrie are, I'm assuming they're very close, but you know how they say don't do business with friends? Every single time you and your friend end up entering in a business with one another, things start to change. It's not necessarily a guy that you're just buddies with and you're cracking jokes with anymore. Your success is tied to this friend. And if this friend has other priorities in mind, which Kyrie has the right to, and it's affecting your own legacy, then you might feel a specific type of way towards said friend. Maybe that's why Kyrie and KD allegedly aren't close anymore or as close anymore. But again, this is just coming from a beat writer who said they are close, they're just not as close as you think. Now here's where it gets really spicy, and if you're a Laker fan, you definitely want to turn up the volume for this part, because according to Mark Stein, it seems like Kyrie Irving has already spoke to LeBron James. So according to this report by Mark Stein, there are credible rumblings in circulation that Kyrie Irving has indeed had some recent contact with LeBron James to presumably discuss a potential reunion in Los Angeles. I've been hearing so much crazy stuff in regards to Kyrie Irving possibly joining the Los Angeles Lakers, and I'll tell you this, I don't think this is a scenario where Kyrie Irving would be willing to opt out of a $36 million contract and then go sign with the Los Angeles Lakers on a $6 million taxpayers mid-level exception. I mean, it would be absolutely hysterical if it does happen, and if there's anyone that would do it, it's Kyrie Irving, but I really highly doubt that any human being in the world would do something like that. So if you really wanted this to work out, there would have to be some sort of trade involving Russell Westbrook. And we're going to keep an eye out throughout the entire day, because a huge day where this type of stuff could happen is today. So let me know what you guys think about this ridiculous, man. I apologize that these videos are so long. I just want to package everything for you because it takes a lot of time to research this for you guys. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like, subscribe, and turn on our notifications to help the channel grow. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.